We're officially live on Facebook for the B2B Community Builder Show. I am your host, Pablo Gonzalez, and your Chief Executive Connector. And today's show, I'm really pumped for this, right? Because I'm in this like FINCON breakout and I'm meeting amazing people. And I sit next to Spencer and I start picking his brain a little bit about this idea of being a podcast booking agent. He tells me his story of how he pivoted from being a music booker. And I'm like, oh my God, that was a piece of advice that I gave to the last music booker, but I hadn't talked to someone since like mid 2020. And I asked him how many shows he's been on giving this advice of his expertise. And he said, not many. So this is a really great opportunity to showcase something that I think is really vastly underrated, which is how you can get on more podcasts, use it. It's the new PR. And I'm just really pumped to have Spencer Carpenter on the show. Welcome, Spencer. How you doing, buddy?
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be able to talk to people about this. Like you said, I haven't been able to do it much, to just give out the info to people. So I'm happy I can be here and help.
I love it, man. I appreciate your generosity and wanting to do this. I appreciate our community that's already showing up. We got Penny Rose in the house. She's here in Jacksonville. She's a CPA for content creators, Spencer. I'm pretty sure you got some clients that could use her services. We got Venya Logan, who is, I just onboarded her last week. Best conversation I've had about community in my life. Super pumped for that show. We got Kira Lescu. Kira, great to have you from the Rockies. Kira is a fascinating person with some really interesting perspectives as well. Great to have you on board. I'm flattered that you make time with us. As you may or may not know, we start with this interview with Spencer, and then at the end of the hour, we go into our relationship-driven growth strategy sessions where my partner Isar and I, we've got some things we've been seeing in the ecosystem that we want to share, but we always start with anybody asking for advice. We got a lot to give. So those have been going great. Spencer, you're obviously invited to stick around after. I don't expect you to. You're a busy man, but you can do whatever you want to be part of the conversation. And I would love to just kind of start with you right now, Spencer. As you're a music booking agent, right? And you're getting people on shows, completely different life. You reinvented yourself during the pandemic as a podcast booking person. As somebody that deals with big crowds, big acts, big spaces, things of the sort, when you got into the podcast game, what was it about getting people onto podcasts and the value behind that you think really made you want to stick around to this game?
Yeah, so I'd already been listening to podcasts for a few years as a way to learn while I was in the car. I found that audiobooks could be very boring. I've tried to finish Think and Grow Rich in audio and book format like 10 times, and it's just so boring. Even though everyone loves it, it's too boring. And so I looked at podcasts as a way that I could continue learning while in the car. And one of the craziest pieces I got from listening to like real estate investing podcasts was people that were self-proclaimed morons. They would say, I did not do good in school. I dropped out, but I was able to look at real estate investing this way and flip a house and make 30 grand my first try. And I was like, man, he didn't do anything new. He just had this tool that he used to give himself an advantage. He had a mindset or some sort of strategy that other people weren't utilizing. And I started to realize that like anybody that gets paid for something, they're a professional and an expert at what they're doing, but they likely have some sort of strategy that's making them successful versus anybody else. And I was like, there's probably a lot of people out there outside of just real estate investing that have these nuggets of information. Maybe the whole 60 minutes isn't game changing, but they might have like one 60-second piece that makes the whole episode worth it. And I just wanted to be able to help people that were stuck in quarantine get that knowledge out, because they weren't able to go to conferences or expos or places like Podfest and network and make new connections. So that was what got this idea going of starting a podcast booking agency that specialized in investors, entrepreneurs, and business professionals, because I knew that no matter what the service is, they are professionals that have done stuff they have marketing experience, they have sales experience, they've scaled businesses, they all have something they can teach people. So that's what really got me going with the idea.
I love that, man. And I love that that's where you took the question, because I think when people frame what they're doing from a place of service, right? Like I believe that human beings are happiest when in service. And it's very clear to me that you have that connection. And I can tell you, man, like to me, what you're describing rings really, really true, because learning via audio on podcasts specifically completely changed my life, right? Like I was like stuck in a career in 2016, listened to Serial, and then all of a sudden went down the rabbit hole of all these different podcasts that ended up bringing me to the Gary Vee experience, which is what ended up turning me into a marketer. And that's very, very real. My big question though, for our friend that is listening to in her ear right now, and our community that's here on the show, why would anybody pay somebody to put him on podcast? Like what's the value prop of going on podcast as the person showing up? Like what is the big upside and that big opportunity that's creating this growing field for you that we were just talking about?
Yeah, I mean, obviously SEO is a big thing. I'm not a marketing expert, so I'm not going to go into, the SEO conversation. Everyone knows what SEO is, and they get pitched about it from every marketing angle there is. But the thing that I think is most important is, in an age of social media, and it's not like running ads is a new thing. Everyone's running ads, from big companies to mom and pop shops, but it's disruptive, and it's relying on producing content that costs money or time, getting the content out there, getting the person's attention, keeping their attention for 30 to 60 seconds, maybe getting them to a website, and then getting them to convert. And it's a lot of steps. The difference with podcasts is a podcast has already built up a designated listenership that is volunteering to listen. And it's not volunteering to listen for 60 seconds. They're volunteering to listen for 25 to 45 or 60 minutes. And so when you think about how much people are spending to try and get someone's attention in 60 seconds, and they could just go and be on a podcast for free, just by pitching themselves, it's silly to think that there are people not doing it. And, it's not just that there's that time, but they get to give away information. People get to hear the backstory. They get to know their personality. They get to hear a joke. Even if they're just listening, you can hear a smile. When you can hear someone smiling when they're talking, when they're excited about something. And all of that translates into building rapport and trust with the listener that they've never talked to. And so then if at the end of the interview, the person actually needs that person's service, they might reach out, and to the guest, it's a cold lead. It's someone that they haven't talked to, but they're like extremely hot lead. It's not cold at all, even though they've never talked to them, because they just got warmed up for 60 minutes on this podcast. And then lastly, because podcasts are usually centered around giving information and giving to the people listening, it's a no pitch scenario. So, if you take a financial planner or a CPA, for example, not everyone really wants to talk to them about their job, especially if they're being charged $500 an hour for it. But if one of them can come on and tell someone how they can plan for their future better, or save on their taxes for free, they're going to listen. And then they might be converted over time because they got to know this person, they trust them, and realize that they could use their service.
I love those 3 bullet points, man, because you hear it in different ways and you're clearly used to articulating this, right? But number one, the idea that it is a voluntary enrollment, I never really heard it said that way. And I love it, right? Because it's this idea of, it's much easier to be introduced to somebody by a buddy than it is to go on a dating app and convince somebody to go on a date with you, right? Like the same way that it is easier to get into a productive business conversation when someone's like, oh yeah, man, Spencer is the expert at podcast guesting. Like, talk to my friend Spencer, as opposed to you telling people, hey man, I'm over here, come pay me to do this thing. I love the contextualization of the long form relationship, right? Like this idea that really hit me hard in like 2019. I was going to this conference, so I started listening to the dude's podcast. It was actually Ryan Moran. It was a capitalism conference, and I started listening to his podcast, and I remember hearing a guy that was going to be a keynote speaker at the podcast and showing up to the conference and being like, oh my God, that's the guy I heard on a podcast. And that's where my head went immediately. And then I talked to him, I was like, oh, wait a minute. This is just like a regular dude. He's got like 800 followers on Instagram. He just happens to be doing, right? Like, and the intimacy of listening to people for a while in your ears does something to the brain, right? Like listening to the Nirvana album, like it has this like sentimental thing that really buys in. And I now get to experience it a lot with my own podcast. This idea that I meet people and they already know so much about me that they feel like they know me. And, I deliberately, because of that, before I take meetings, I'm generally like, hey man, before we meet, have you been on a podcast recently? Can you send it to me so I can hear it? And oh, by the way, here's mine. Because I know that if they hear it, then I'm going to show up and they're going to be super all in. Right. So I love all that, man. And then the non-salesy thing is just very natural to me. That's honestly what brought me to all this, is because I'm a shitty salesperson. So I had to figure out a way to build businesses as a great opener and not a good closer, because I don't believe in closing.
Well, I'm not a good salesperson either, unless it's something I believe in, but I'm not a closer either. I've never tried to close anybody on the phone. And you said I'm very good at articulating this. It's because I don't like selling. Yeah. And what I realized is, even if I sign up for a consultation call for someone to sell to me, I know that I'm going into that and they're going to be selling to me. It doesn't make it any easier. I still have my guard up. I don't like feeling like I'm being manipulated in some way, even if it's really nice. Even if they say, you know what, I'm going to provide this discount. It's great. I just got a discount. But instead, in the back of my head, I'm like, is it for me or do you offer it to everybody? It still just makes me cynical. And so that's why the being able to be on a podcast in a no pitch scenario is so powerful. And to piggyback off of what you were saying about, meeting these people, the first podcast I really got into was Bigger Pockets. So that was real estate investing. The second one was Crypto 101. It was a crypto podcast. And I listened to it for every day for about a year. And finally, I was following the host on Twitter. He said he was in Philadelphia, where I was at. And I hit him up. I said, hey, do you want to grab dinner? He said, yes. And I kept having to stop myself when I was talking to him from thinking that he knew my backstory, because I knew him so well. I'd be like, oh yeah, you remember, I was like in music for a while. And he's like, I saw his face. I'm like, wait, you don't know me, but I know you really well. So yeah, that was another thing that was really powerful as I was going into this industry, is I remembered that experience of meeting someone I knew, getting dinner with him, and having to remind myself, I know him. I know so much about him and he knows nothing about me.
It's so true. It's so true. I've been on both sides of that equation now, and it's really a trip. Anyways, all right, cool. We got some great Q&A rolling in. We've established the importance of why we need to be listening to this thing. Before we get to the Q&A, I want to give some value for those of you that have already showed up. If you were already, this far into the podcast, Spencer, we called this thing Secrets of a Podcasting Agent, right? So I want you to just, let's go, right? Like, what is the methodology? I'm somebody that's trying to build out my own way of getting on shows. What is your best advice? How do people get on more shows?
Sure. So obviously a lot of it has to do with your pitch, as well as how many people you reach out to. So the number of shows you reach out to, that's pretty obvious. If you can reach out to 100 shows, you'll probably get 5 to 10 podcasts by yourself just fine. Maybe you'll get more, depending on how experienced you are in your space. But let's focus on the pitch for a second. So off the bat, I really like I first started off with podcast submission, so-and-so, their expertise. Now I'm like, they're probably, maybe a podcast host gets a ton of those. And as soon as they see podcast submission, they stop reading. So I started thinking, I need to be more engaging in the subject. I need to tell them why the person matters, before I tell them their name. Their name doesn't matter. The name doesn't matter until they know why the person matters. Also, just a little marketing tip: if you can work an emoji into the subject, it catches eyes way better. It doesn't matter what it is, just add an emoji. Try and make it relevant. put it somewhere that makes sense, but it will catch the eye better, especially on a phone where a lot of people are reading their emails.
Let me stop you right there on the subject, man, because I'm a huge fan of hook points. Like, you got to have someone's attention, right? Like, noticed I didn't call this thing Secrets of a Podcasting Agent. I called it How to Get on More Podcasts.
Yes.
Right. I think that worked really, really well. So when you're thinking about that headline, you already said name matters less, add an emoji, anything else that you make it engaging in order for the headline to read right when you're reaching out on the pitch.
I mean, obviously, if you can work in the biggest statistic you have. So for example, one of my real estate guys he's done 2.5 billion in transactions and has 5,000 units in his portfolio. If you can work those numbers into your subject, you're going to get a lot of people opening that, as long as, assuming you're reaching out to industry specific podcasts. Maybe to your point, secrets of how to reach financial independence in your early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Maybe that's a little bit corny. Maybe it's not. You can work through it a little bit. If I'm not feeling good about what I just wrote, I usually wait on it a day, come back, and stuff like that. Again, I won't say I'm a marketing expert. There are probably people that have a lot better experience than I have, but through my experience with music, I used to reach out to sponsors and booking agents. And so these people that I could not provide any value to, but I always got them to respond and open my email. And that was something I got really good at. It kind of just came naturally to me without really having marketing expertise. So Israel is saying, what about the 222 rule? I actually don't know what that is. I'm sorry. I'm not. So
I don't think anybody does. I'm down to hear more about the 2-2 rules. So
yeah, we'll do that in the Q&A.
Yeah, she's saying 2 words for hook, 2 words to qualify, 2 words to clarify. I'm going to find out more about that in a second. Okay, so, but what you did say that was very clear is, name is not valuable, stats are valuable. Like, you're basically saying front load the value onto the beginning of the subject line as opposed to names or anything selfish.
Yeah,
love that.
Founder, CEO, expert,
Cool.
guru. I mean, not guru. Guru is kind of corny, but you get it.
Cool. Plus emoji.
Plus emoji.
All right. So what's next? On the pitch?
All right. So for the pitch, I try not to keep it. I try not to let it get too long. But here's the secret: if in the opening sentence you can tell the host why they should have the person on the podcast, it doesn't matter how long the rest of it is. They'll read the rest if they're interested in the first 2 sentences. So every single pitch I have starts off with, I'm reaching out about so-and-so being on insert podcast to discuss, and I lead with the 2 most valuable topics they have. It's a big run-on sentence. I don't care that it's probably not grammatically correct or in line with what PR companies do. I get them with the first 2 or 3 lines, and from there, I try to keep it, background, what the company does now, and then like where how far they've come. So I try to keep it to like 2.5 paragraphs. But what I really like to do that is going to stand out from someone that has no experience doing this, maybe doesn't know what they're doing, is I present 4 to 6 topics to the host that my client can speak on. And I really drag out of my clients, like, you can't say, I can talk about marketing, I can talk about sales, I can talk about scaling a business. There are lots of people that can do that. You have to be more specific. And so if you can say, I can speak about marketing through, unknown AI technologies. I don't know. I'm just making that up. Yeah. That's a little more appealing. You have to find a way to make it stand out in a way that is different. And it doesn't always have to be reinventing the wheel. I had a real estate guy that's a wholesaler, which means he just sells deals to other people. And the opening line is actually, the subject is how to make $100,000 on vacation, because when he was on vacation, he had $100,000 in wholesale commissions come into the company. He didn't do anything special. He had 3 well-trained employees. That's it. It was just that he hired well and trained them. But what resulted was $100,000 when he was on vacation. So I made that the subject line. I put a little beach emoji. And then in the subject, I'm reaching about so-and-so being on so-and-so podcast to speak about how you can make $100,000 on vacation and scaling so-and-so business based on this. It wasn't just scaling, it was scaling by doing this.
Got it.
And so that's, those are the ways that you're definitely going to stand out amongst just anyone that really doesn't know what they're doing, that maybe only sent 5 pitches because they did, they thought that's all they needed to do. But if you can do that for 50 to 100 emails, or I'm sorry, 50 to 100 shows, you're going to get interviews. You're going to get invitations.
All right. Love it. I like to paraphrase after a bunch of values dropped on the show, right? So the pitch itself, you again, front load the first paragraph. You don't care that much about grammar, but you are going really hard at what makes somebody unique and valuable to the host, right? So I assume that you're doing homework in the background of, what this show is about. Therefore you have this, this quiver of 4 to 6 topics that you have created for your show host. So if I'm doing this for myself, I'm thinking, what are the 4 to 6 best hook point things that I can talk about that are catchy, important, and relevant, right? Like that to the moment. You mentioned that AI thing, by the way. That was one of my best attended shows when I said, save time and money with content AI. It was my buddy Jakob. And so people are super into that, right? So like the idea that buzzwordy things that people are already wondering more about, if you can throw that in there, that's going to get people there. Grammar matters much less. You also mentioned the 4 to 6 hook points, and to formulate them as hook points, which, whether or not it is something that you think it's interesting, it will be interesting to the viewer or the opener of it. And not to really overthink that, I think, is a really valuable thing, right? Because I feel like once you're an expert, you get a little bit too wordy about the stuff that because you're already trying to differentiate versus another expert, when really the average person is just like, oh yeah, I want to know about that. Is that kind of true?
Yeah, the way I like to think about it is if you can present each one of these hook points as if it was a keynote title or the title of a blog post, or the title, that's exactly, it's the same you would do with the subject of the email. You want it to be concise, and you're not going to give a presentation on marketing. You're going to give a presentation on marketing using AI technology and Google AdWords and how it is better than everything else in the world. That's how you're getting the attention.
Yeah. Venya says that boils down really easy. Call it a keynote title. I love that, Venya. My first ever client was this guy, Brendan Kane, whose first book was about how he grew 1 million followers in 30 days. Second book was all titled Hook Point. And he had this hook point exercise. And he talks about, think about what you're going to write, right? And now think about, you are walking towards to catch your flight, which leaves in half an hour. You got a little bit of time, not a lot of time. You'd rather be there early, but you're walking down the airport terminal. You happen to look to the left. You see a whole newsstand full of stuff. What's going to get you to stop, walk up to a magazine, and open it? Mm-hmm. Right? So like that's how hard he goes at that.
And I'll say, not all 6 have to be like that. If you can catch them with 2, the other 4 don't need to be as unique, as much as just show that you're more rounded. Then you can say, like, also has, can also speak about a sales funnels or something. I mean, you still don't want it to be boring, but you really have to hook them with the 2. Especially, lots of podcasts, they only need they only really need to focus on a couple subjects. It doesn't need to be 6, but you can use that other space to just show the other areas that you can speak on if that's valuable to them.
Cool. And at the end of the day, it's really just like first 2 lines of the email is the only thing that's going to get them to read the rest of the email, right? The subject and the first 2 lines, those have to hit. Everything else, keep it short, but keep it interesting.
Don't talk about walking your dog on the beach. You can be a proud father all you want. It's not helpful during the pitch, unless you're pitching to a parenting podcast. It's just not, if you've done marathons or you're a black belt in jiu-jitsu, have a more about section where you have like podcasts you've been on, press you've been in, if you're a part of any groups, if you've done anything unique like that, you've run ultra marathons, throw that in there. That's cool. But I have that as a section underneath the topics, and it's not in the bio. It is more about section. And by the way, I can also provide like a sample of one of my pitches to the group if that's helpful at the end.
I think that'd be awesome, especially if you're going to stick around strategy sessions. That'd be amazing. Do you, and Penny Rose says, yes. Do you attach like a 1-pager or link to a landing page, anything like that?
So below that more about section, all the relevant social media links. They're not just hyperlinks, because by the way, when you pitch to people, you're also going to get shows that tell you to submit through a Google form. If you've hyperlinked everything in like your Google Doc draft, it's not going to transfer over when you paste it into the Google form. So I do website dash the URL, Instagram dash the URL. Again, you'll see this in the sample. Oh, but one pagers. No. And this is where I also differ from most PR and marketing people. Being in the music industry for 15 years, I had bands hit me up all the time, and they would try and include this impressive one pager that like I would click on it and then the URL wouldn't work. Or I'd try and copy and paste this stuff and it's not formatted. I just didn't, maybe I'm just lazy. I just want to read in an email. I want to see it right there. Don't send me to something else. Don't send me to something beautiful one pager that you put all this time and effort into, but like now it's bright orange on black and it just annoys my eyes. Just give me the white, the black on the white. Personally, that's just how it works best for me. That's how I built it up. I know lots of people love the one pager, but I've had plenty of success without it.
Got it. That makes sense, right? So reduce liabilities, right? Like if it's a link that could break, that could be a liability. If it's a, one pager that's too over designed or whatever, that could turn people off, right? Like keep it simple, stupid makes a lot of sense for me. Another thing that I get a lot, because I get like 10 emails a week of somebody trying to pitch something poorly, not as good as this, right? Julie, I see you on Facebook. Yeah, we're going to talk about the sample pitch in a second. And Craig, good to see you, man. I hear a lot of like, I have my own microphone and I got good lighting and I'm going to share it with all my people. Does that work for you? Does that drive any results? Do you know about that? Have you heard anything on that?
The reason I haven't been on podcasts is because I'm not someone that likes to be in the spotlight. So I don't do content. I should, I just don't. Luckily, I'm good at what I do and I get a lot of referral work as a result. But
I mean like including that you have good equipment or anything like that in the pitch.
No, I've never done that because they're just going to let you know that you need a microphone. A lot of the host might have a referral link set up. They'd rather you not have a microphone so you can buy it through them. But if you're producing content though, that's valuable to add, through your links and stuff. Sorry, I misunderstood that question.
No, that's cool. That's cool. I got you.
But I never add anything about the formats they can use or the equipment they have or anything like that.
Okay, cool. All right. So let's move on to the infrastructure of it, right? Like you had first talked about pitch and the amount of things that you do. So let's talk about how to systemize that, right? Can you tell me about your system of how you rack up 100 podcasts to go reach out to, or what tools you're using in order to make that efficient?
Yeah. So as it relates to me working with like 50 people at any given time in various industries, I love using Podmatch. It's a great way for you to create a profile. It's essentially a one pager, but on the internet, on their platform, and you can create a custom link so you can send any host that that you meet to that. And it also has shows that are looking for guests. So you know that you're not pitching to someone that doesn't already want, that doesn't want guests. Because I find emails. That's what I do. I dig to get contacts for shows. Not all the shows need people, but the shows on Podmatch are shows that are looking for guests. So it's a low-hanging fruit, assuming that you have content that they need. And as it relates to me,
Podmatch is Alex Sanfilippo's company, right? Yeah. That guy, he's been on the show before. He's from Jacksonville. He's
fantastic.
He's a good buddy. He's a great dude. Great company.
Great guy.
All right, yeah. Continue. So use Podmatch. That's a great way to like scale it out. Okay.
Yeah, and it's great for again, the low-hanging fruit, the people that are looking for shows. But especially as it relates to some industries, it's only going to have the shows that decided to come onto Podmatch. So I also do a lot of outreach through email, and the way that I am able to get a lot of emails is through podcastwise.com. And it's a database that there might be a free option. I'm not sure. I know that there's like $100 a month option where you have some limit on how many lists you can make, but you can add literally hundreds of shows to your list and then export it. And when you export it, it'll have the description, the show name, the email. I think the email is just based off of the RSS feed. I don't know where it actually pulls the email from. So it might be an old email, but it has a link to the show, their website. At one point, I think it even had the social media links, but I haven't seen that as much recently. I don't know if that's updated, but that's how I go and get literally 150 shows to do a mass outreach for someone that maybe I'm booking 50 shows for. And so
if I'm hearing you correctly on that one, like podcast wise, let's say you're a person, you're not building a business out of this just for yourself and you're trying to save a couple bucks. If you just pay the $100 one time, you can just get all the addresses once, download them, and then you're not paying $100 a month, right? So you can do that one time. Okay,
Correct.
cool. That makes sense.
And you know, let's just say you have a course coming out or a book, and maybe it is worth it to have it for a few months. You can go in and make other lists. I think the most expensive product is I pay $200 a month and I can have as many lists as I want. So that could be a parenting list. That could be a finance list. That could be a stocks list. That could be a VC list. That could be, you know, agricultural list. I don't know. But yeah, you can then also refine the searches of those shows based on how many episodes they've put out, how many 5-star reviews they have. I think you can do average review number. And so, you know, if you're just trying to make sure that you're not on a brand new show, you set it to, it needs to have 25 episodes, or it needs to have 25 5-star reviews. And then I'll take that daunting number of 300 page results down to, you know, maybe 20. And then you can go through, I just scan, the description is right there, right on the page. I scan it. If it looks like it has what I want, I add it to my list, and it's just an easy click of a button. You can also just find a show and click the email button. There's only 2 buttons when you see the show. It's add it to a list or get the email right away. It just copies it. And so, yeah, that's a great way to build out a massive list. There are other platforms out there. I know Listen Notes is one that a lot of people like. I'm sure there's more, but I've just found that I get done what I need through podcast wise. And so then let's just say, you know, you send out an email to a show you really wanted and it bounces.
Well, let me recap that real quick, right? So it's like podcast wise is one that you're recommending, but at the end of the day, the advice is there are services that you can, you know, search by topic, filter by reviews, which is a legitimacy of show, number of episodes, which is a legitimacy of show, and then build a list very, very quickly that you can then put your pitch to work inside of. That's kind of like what I took from that. And that makes a lot of sense. Okay.
And you can even do it based on audience size. I just don't actually know how to verify what they estimate the size is. Sometimes they'll say estimated size of 90,000 to 160,000. I'm like, well, one, that's a big spread, but I also have no idea where you're getting that from. I've heard that they are accurate, but don't worry. Again, don't worry about the size, because if you're speaking to 100 new people that are really engaged with what you're saying, that's worth it for 45 minutes. So don't set it to only 100,000 or something.
Let's double tap into that real quick, because we talked about it on the onboarding call. This idea that small podcasts have value. The first time that I didn't realize it, right? But like my buddy Jerry McNamara, who we helped him launch a podcast, he used Podmatch at first, and he was like, listen, man, I just haven't been on a lot of podcasts. So I just went and I got like 20 reps in of a bunch of like small shows. And that by itself was super valuable to me. The practice of how to talk before I go on to bigger shows was a major validation and kind of like confidence builder for him. But you've talked about other perks of being on smaller podcasts. You want to tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, when it comes back to the people volunteering to listen, obviously the more you can speak to, the better. But like, if you're new in business, or if even like 2 conversions get you what you need for the month, just expense wise, cover your expenses, then I don't care if the podcast has 20 people, just have a 10% conversion rate, but through being authentic and you'll be fine. But this is where it's also important to, I said I'm not going to cover the SEO part, but like this is where SEO can be important. If the show is called Financial Planner Podcast and you're a financial planner, I don't care if it has 0 reviews, do that podcast, because for SEO purposes, you were on the show called the Financial Planner Podcast. It can't sound any more expert and legitimate than that.
Yeah.
But yes, so smaller numbers are still fine if you're providing valuable content. I remember this is a music story from my mentor. He was at a bar one time in New York City, and he was on tour with a band called Juliana Theory, who was known in the punk realm. But he happened to meet up with Joey Ramone and Bon Iver, which are, some of you may not know them, but they're pretty well known in their areas of music. And they walked into a bar where a guy was playing acoustic, and they were the only 4 people in the room. But it's like important that guy played as good as if it was a sold out show, because the only 4 people that were there were massive names in the music industry. And obviously, I'm not saying that that's going to happen on every podcast, but the thing is, every listener that's volunteering to listen to you for 45 to 65 minutes or 60 minutes is a potential client that is now getting to know you, and you're building the rapport. And if you're on the show, it means there's some chance that what you have to say is relevant to them. And also just in general, I mean, if you don't know, people that listen to podcasts are more likely to be engaging on social media. They're college educated. They usually have higher than average salaries, so they have the disposable income. Those are just basic statistics that if you're on a podcast because you have a service, like you're already in the right place. You're hedging your bets the best you can in just about every way with podcasts.
Awesome. You know what I love about that story, man, is it's the power of showing up is something that I talk about all the time, right? Like, I'm like, always just like, dude, if you're going to go to a networking event, even though like you're pissed that you have to go to it, just like show up, like show up and like give the best energy that you can. The difference with a podcast is that it has so much long tail, right? Like that room, if Joey Ramone wasn't in that room, that dude would have never been discovered. But if he would have been playing in that room and Joey Ramone's friend was there and it was being recorded, and then Joey Ramone could be just like emailed the recording of it and or tagged on a LinkedIn post about how good this guy was, that's what podcasting is, right? It's being in that room, plus it has long tail, plus it has, they're totally evergreen. Exactly, Penny. It's an evergreen thing that people can use to introduce you to other people, right? So that's normally what I do. Like if I'm like, hey, introduce me to somebody, I'm just like, send them this episode about me. This is great. This is a great description of me, right? Like, cool. Love that. So you were down the path of, we have the list. Now it goes into, now this is where you put your pitch to work. Are you creating like an email cadence? Do you email anybody more than once? What's kind of that move?
Yeah. So, if I'm just reaching out to 20 shows or something, I'll just do that manually. I'll add their name, add the show name, and, set a reminder to follow up in, a week or a week and a half or something. But I actually do a lot of automated email campaigns through Woodpecker. I don't know. I don't go comparing services all the time. There's other email, providers out there, but this is just one I found. And, you can connect an email for, I think, $100 or something like that. And, it's just a great way to set how many emails you want to send out a day. You can send a flow of, email reminders. I definitely am not someone that follows up 2 days later. I usually follow up, over a week. I usually set for 8 days, and then the next one is like 9 days. I don't want it to look like I followed up week by week. I don't know why I feel that way. It's just like, I don't want it to be every Tuesday. It kind of looks robotic. And, I don't try to be pushy. The first email is like, hey, just circling back on this, because you understand that people get lots of emails and they miss them. And then the third, I send usually a third email.
Do you change the email? So circling back on this, same exact pitch again or different?
I keep it in the same email. So It is a follow-up on the same email. There is the option to change the subject. Again, I'm not a marketing expert, so I haven't dove into that. I just keep it the same. But, sometimes, especially if I believe that to your point, actually, about sharing an old podcast you've been on, I like to use those little things, the most valuable pieces of content I have in my follow-ups. So it's like, hey, so-and-so, just wanted to follow up and you get your thoughts on this submission. So-and-so was recently on this show talking about this. If you want to check out the interview, let me know your thoughts. And then the last one is just, I just really like to preserve my relationships. I want to make sure I'm reaching out to the right people. Even if they're annoyed by me, I want to be nice. So it's just like, hey, if it's not a good fit, just let me know. I don't want to bother you again in the future if it's not. Also, just if you're going to do this a lot for yourself, getting them to respond, especially with an automated email campaign, is good. It looks good on your email address so that, it doesn't look like you're spamming people. So I really push to get the no's because it helps build up my email address's credibility for future outreach.
Love that. Love that. Okay, cool, man. So I'm going to get to the Q&A in a second. I want to do one more round of like value from you. And we have figured out why this thing is valuable. We now know the pitch and the system to create for yourself. But we had a really interesting conversation of how you advise your clients of like, what to do after the podcast, right? So if you're putting in all this effort to be a guest, like, and you're guesting, what else do they need to be doing? Once they've been on, what do you do there? What are you advising there?
I mean, this is for both you and to give back to the host that just put you on their platform. You obviously need to share it. Whatever your social media accounts of choice are, whether it be LinkedIn or Facebook or Instagram, you better be sharing it. It did nothing for you if in the event that you did just talk to talk on this podcast and maybe you didn't get any leads out of it. Well, you better be sharing it to your network where you probably have potential leads that didn't convert, but maybe started keeping an eye on you. If they see that you're getting invited on the podcast, building your reputation, building your authority, that's great. I also like to think it's great for reaffirming your clients already. Now they know they made the right choice because you're the guy or gal that's getting invited to be an expert on these shows. So it's great for email lists. But for anybody that wants to be creating content, the host just did it for you. Yeah. You didn't have to pay for it. You didn't have to hire a videographer. You didn't have to sit down and script it out. It's just, they just create it for you. And I don't know, I've never had a host deny me the Zoom file for the video. So you can go and repurpose it if you want. A lot of hosts are not creating social media graphics. They are not creating the 60-second blurbs, but you can go do that. And you can hire a VA to do it really, really cheaply too, if you can get the file from the host. If you tell the host that you want the file so that you can promote it, they're going to give it to you. So, I mean, just so
simple stuff, reshare, ask for the file so that you can repurpose any infrastructure.
And also make sure you leave a 5-star review.
Why is that? You had told me before the value of that.
I mean, it helps grow the show. If you grow the show, then 3 years down the road, people are still listening to your interview because they go back and listen to older episodes. I mean, I'm not saying your review is going to affect the size of the show in 3 years, but just get into a habit. And also hosts will bring you back. If they've had 20 interviews and not a single person gave them a 5-star review and you do, they're going to really appreciate that. And it's also, remember, these hosts are your potential referrals. If you're on the show, it means that you're in a similar industry. They're going to remember the person that was nice and promoted their show. Pablo, you created a banner image on LinkedIn. I have not had a banner image for the 10 years I've had LinkedIn or however long I've had it, but you made that for me. So I made it my banner image because you put in that effort and I appreciated that. So that's, you just want to reciprocate it.
Love that. Love that. And first of all, Roanne made the effort. So kudos to Roanne for handling all that stuff.
Thank you, Roanne.
And JP. But yeah, man, that's part of our thing. You know what I love about what you're saying, Spencer? Number one, the fact that most of the advice that you've given today has been from a place of service, right? Like it's always kind of like what's in it for them is the way that you're approaching, the way that you get people on shows and what you do and what you tell people to do on shows. And therefore, you are being extremely relationship driven over transaction driven, but you're making a very clear point of what's in it for you, right? Like the idea that reposting is, yes, of course, be a mensch, like post, like share the episode that you're on because they just did that work. But somebody in your own network that sees it, that's validation for you that you were on a show. Somebody that's your client that sees it, validation for you that they're working for an expert. Putting in the 5-star review seems like an act of service for somebody else, but at the end of the day, it benefits you, the more 5-star reviews that a podcast that you've been on has had, right? So like, I love how you're bringing it all together, man. That's really great.
I mean, I'm really about win-win scenarios, which is actually part of the reason I was terrible in the music industry, because in the music industry, all you're supposed to care about is like the person you represent, and you pretend that you care about the other side. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure your person gets the most money, even if it's out of the other person's pocket, losing on a show. And I hated that part of it. So yes, you want to ask for that Zoom file so that you can repurpose it for you, but also give that 5-star review.
Yeah.
Give back to the host.
Yeah.
I mean, as long, that's all they are asking for. They're using their show in their own way. They're going to benefit it for some reason. That's why you were able to get on for free, but still give something back to them. It takes you 2 minutes. I think that every podcast on their Calendly link should have a checkbox that says, I agree to leave a 5-star review and ask two of my friends to do it as well. It can be an assistant, an employee, a family member. 2 is not very much. And they might click the box and never do it, but you bet you're going to get 3 from someone.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, man. I love that. All right. I'm going to go into Q&A. I want to tell everybody, right, in about 13 minutes, we're going into relationship-driven growth strategy sessions. From here on out, it's full Q&A with Spencer. Spencer, how long will it take you to pull up a sample pitch that you've done? Will it take you a minute, or do we want to wait till strategy sessions, or can you do that right now while I'm like...
I can do it right now.
Doing some. All right. All right. So while you are doing it, I'm gonna ask. Kira is asking. Kira, it's great to see you again, by the way, or hear from you again. She asks, when do you go for podcasting versus other social media content such as video or live stream, right? So I guess the question here is like, what do you see as the benefit of like devoting my effort to getting on podcasts versus like making a whole bunch of social media?
Well, you making all the social media, whether costing you time or money or resources, is the number one way you're going to save by just doing a podcast, as the host is doing it for you. Now, and even people that create good organic content where they are just straight giving information, like I have some friends that are in marketing. I think it's weird when they hold up their phone and try to give an inspirational speech. There are other people that love it, but I've known this kid since he was 5, and he dropped out of high school because he didn't want to go to class, and I'm just not going to be inspired by him because I know his backstory. And I think even if you're being sincere, it can come off corny or disingenuous in some way. I mean, everyone reacts to things differently, but in a podcast scenario, you're interviewing me. Yeah. I'm not having to create an inspirational quote. If you tell me I have great nuggets on this, it's because you brought it out of me. You set me up for it.
Oh, you got some great nuggets, buddy. You bring up something that I was actually about to hit on a second ago. The beauty of co-creation, man. The beauty of co-creation is real when it comes to content. What you just mentioned, like this thing, I'm a good public speaker. I'm a performer. I still feel douchey when I'm doing this thing, like when I'm talking to my phone. So it's much easier to make content with a buddy and to co-create. Now you have a win-win scenario for everybody, right? So like, I wanted to bring this up when you're talking about win-win scenarios, but like one of the biggest unlocks in my life has been, I've always wanted to be a connector and an introducer because I realized that that's a win-win scenario, but co-creation of content really, really enables that. And that's a really valuable thing to have in your life. And then what you just said, my biggest client, JWB, that we do this show, we just did that, we've been doing this show for a while. They've now asked me to do their quarterly client updates because they realize it's much easier for me to talk to the co-founder about what are you guys up to than it is for him to put together a keynote speech. And it just comes across, like you said, way more genuine, and it comes across as easy to deliver, and it's less work, less psychological lift on his end.
Well, it's also, you just put in all the time and resources into creating this show and this webinar. Like, why would I let that go to waste? You did all the work. Like, all I need to do is repurpose it, and it's free. It's like borrowing something. You're not going to, we love our phones. Like, you don't need to go build a new one. They already did it for you. Just use it. Yeah. Yeah. You don't need to go make your new content if someone else already invested in the infrastructure of creating your content for you.
True. Love it. Kira's second half of that question, maybe you got some on this, because I'm really into the idea of, what do you think about live, what's the difference between podcasting versus live streaming? Do you have any kind of takes on that?
I mean, if the live stream is going to be repurposed later on and can be viewed, then it's great. But otherwise, you're getting people, it's only accessible to the people that are there right then. The thing that makes podcasts great is that it combines the learning of audiobooks with the long form entertainment of Howard Stern with the streaming of Spotify, like now when I'm available to do it. It takes those 3 things. And obviously not all podcasts are about learning, but for the purpose of this group, let's cut out the true crime stuff. That's what it's for, is you can use it when you want, for whatever subject you want and whatever format you want, or whatever genre. And so, people like doing live streams as a way to do more content. It's something that keeps them consistent. They like to test themselves, I think, and see if I can get everyone here at dinner time on a Tuesday night. Man, if you can get 200 people to do that, you're doing a great thing. But I think it's just great for, I listen to podcasts when I'm mowing the lawn. I'm not getting on a live stream if I'm mowing the lawn.
Yeah, I agree. And as you know, I believe in the idea of doing it's a both and thing, right? Like it doesn't hurt to live stream. It actually, for me, the effort that I put into inviting people to show up to something on Zoom as opposed to just live streaming is really worth it, because I really believe that Venia and Don and Penny and Kira in this chat are connecting at a higher level than they would be if they were just on my Facebook Live, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea that you can talk to more people and get people to connect with each other and start to build community, to me, is the ultimate play. But I also live stream in case anybody wants to tap in, because I also see that when I'm going live, I put, hey, join in live if you want to ask Spencer a question. And I inevitably get a couple of people that show up mid-show because they just happen to see it on the live stream, and you happen to say something brilliant as you continue to do, and then they want to join in, right? So they come a step closer, and then I repurpose to asynchronous so that you can do it while mowing the lawn, right? So you can do it while walking your dog.
I'd say it's the only downside is if you don't repurpose it. I do know a guy that does some sort of webinar every Wednesday at 2:00, and I cannot get him to upload the file as a podcast.
Yeah, correct.
He's so silly. And it's just like, it's for, you just go make the account. You don't need to hire me to do it or anything like that. Just go upload it. It's one more place that you're being built.
One more thing. Yeah,
yep.
Totally.
And I look at the same way. If you're going to start a podcast, do it on Zoom, record it, and add it to YouTube. You don't have to focus on pushing YouTube, but it's just one more place you're adding the content in case you ever want it.
100, bro. Love it. Love it. All right. Venia's got a question that I am intimidated to ask because I don't even know if I can answer it. So I'm going to just do it if we can't answer it, because Venia's smarter than all of us. I get it. Venia asks, you've talked about the importance of parasocial relationships in making cold leads come in hot. How would you recommend measuring community leads as separate segments from standard marketing leads to determine the efficacy of those podcast recipients?
Not sure. Not a marketing expert, not a sales expert. I'm just good at booking podcasts. But I would just, I don't know. It sounds like it's a metrics question as much as anything else. You just got to measure it. You can set up a way to ask, like, what show did you hear me on? You can in the call ask, like, what made you, okay. I do Instagram outreach. That's how I get a lot of my leads. I start off the call saying, what interests you about doing podcasts? Now, some of them already had an interest. Some say, you reached out to me. You tell me why I want to do podcasts. That's fine. I'd gauge them. Like, a lot of them were sold on the idea long before I reached out. They just didn't get around to it. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm sorry, Venia, but I'm trying.
Spencer, I think you're a better intuitive marketer than you think, man. So the one of the number one guys in marketing that I most follow, Chris Walker, he talks about self-reported attribution as a way to measure community leads, right? He recommends that everybody on their website has a mandatory open field that says, how did you hear about us, right? So name, email, phone number, company size, whatever, mandatory open field that says, how do you hear about us? And he talks about this idea that the stuff that they get, sometimes it's just like LinkedIn, bro, but like sometimes they get like a full paragraph, right? So like it's opening up yourself to qualitative insights in whatever demand capture motion that you have already going on, and let people tell you, make it mandatory, but open, right? So you can just put X and press submit, whatever, but that really, really helps, and not prompting people and giving them a couple different things. The other thing, Venia, that I can tell you that we do, this is exactly why we do the Zoom call, right? Because when people register into a Zoom call, I know you're coming from this Zoom call. JWB, the company that we talk about, right? Like we measure the impact that we make on businesses based on how many people within X days of attending a live show, either as a guest or as an audience member, are in the transaction cycle, right? Because we know that there's all this other good things that are happening, but if we can directly attribute the value from just people showing up to the show, then we know that we are 10xing the actual value of everything else, because it's such a key indicator that nobody can argue against, right? Like instead of like listens and blah, 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 we're like, dude, we've sold 22 properties from people that have attended the show within 30 days this quarter, like that, like nobody can argue against that. And then everything else is fluff. But if you can prove your ROI that way, done. But Venia, we're just going to have to wait till you answer that question next week, because I know that that's your specialty. So I can't wait to hear from you on that one. Don Bates, she says, so just to clarify, this was on the pitch part, no personal details and no beach action, right? So like, do you know what I'm talking about?
All right. So this guy's named Jerome Maldonado. I've been working with him for over a year. He's actually Ty Lopez's real estate partner. So I get to lead off with a great pitch a great subject as 9-figure real estate investor and equity owner in Radio Shack, Modal Sports, and Pier 1 Imports, because they have bought all of those brands. I mean, it couldn't get easier for me. This is just 2 long ass sentences about those things. If you get to say you're an owner in Radio Shack and Pier 1 Sports and Pier 1 Imports and Modal Sports, most people in any type of e-commerce or entrepreneurship are happy to listen about that. Next one, though, this is Jerome's story. He was initially just in construction and, ended up buying a warehouse to house his construction stuff and then didn't know how to pay for it in case things went bad. So he started subleasing parts of the warehouse to other people and learned how, how real estate works. He was also an MLM and was really successful at it, and would buy office space and then buy desks, build them by hand, and then rent them to people in his MLM for $50 a month or something like that. And, it's back in the 90s and when it was a little more legitimate. So that's kind of how he learned about rent. So I do go over his story here, but I try to condense it as much as possible. I left out the part that when the recession hit and all of his commercial spaces started having vacancies, he bought 13 Subway franchises and put them in his commercial spaces to stabilize the commercial loan when the banks were trying to come after him, because they were worried that the asset wasn't producing anymore, just because it was too much. I was trying to keep it as concise as possible. And then, how far have we come? In his 20-year career, he's done over 200 million in-house transactions with another 52 million in just 2021 alone. He's just a great guy. I then lead with topics. They're not always keynote. Like I said, they're not always keynote titles, but some of them are. Some are a little more involved. I then go into his accolades or more about section, podcasts he's been on, how many transactions he's done. He was, co-author of a book. Here are the various companies that he owns. He's been a keynote speaker. He does have, a Bachelor of Science in Pharmacy and Dietetic Therapy. And then here is actually where I mentioned the thing about the Subway franchises. And then down at the bottom, website and socials. Again, I make it all so that if I have to copy and paste this into a Google form, I don't have to go back and grab the links again. That's just something I learned after being irritated, wasting time. So this is a little more, this one is a little more involved because he's done a lot. If you don't feel that if you don't have much to put here, you don't have to have this section. But if you have 3 to 5 things, you can add your degrees or, you can add hobbies about yourself, but don't put it in the really good space. You don't want to waste it. You only have the reader's attention for so long, even if they're hooked. I imagine plenty of people read this part and then say, yeah, you can have him on the show. So yeah, if you want to add some personal stuff, you can, but I don't think it's helpful a lot of the time. If it's that you love dogs, but you also volunteer at a shelter, that's a little more to add. It's not just that you love dogs.
Yeah. Got it. All right, cool, man. You want to unshare?
Yes.
So what I want to do now is, Spencer, are you going to be able to stick around a little bit for the strategy session?
Yes.
All right, cool. So what I'm going to do is, Rowan, can you start letting people up for the strategy session? I'm going to ask Spencer a couple more questions and we can kind of roll right into that. What I find interesting there, Spencer, is that similar to the first time I ever read a sales letter, right? Like the first time I ever read a sales letter, I'm like, this is too fucking long to read. Like, I hate it. But these super long texts sometimes actually work better than you think, right? So like Don's having this reaction of like, this thing is way too long, but based on your experience, if you can hook somebody in and then you can get them from point A to point B to point C to point D to point E to point F, then, you know, you're able to like keep them engaged based on this structure. So I think it's always really interesting because I would never have thought that something so lengthy would be effective, but you're a pro at this. So it's
I
interesting.
just, you know, I have a CPA attorney, which when he was presented to me, I'm like, great, you took the two most boring things in the world and you put them into one person. And now I have to go get him podcasts. And I was, you know, this is at the beginning of doing this. And I wasn't sure how I was going to deliver this. Thankfully, he's great at speaking, but you know, all I could do was list all of the incredible shit he's done. You know, he did a bunch of schooling. He's taught at a bunch of schools. You know, he was first in finance and then he decided that he wanted to help on the law side. Like, it required telling that story. And that's all I could do. I also had another guy where I've only done this once. I split it up into like his history did not necessarily flow into what he's doing today. He is a serial entrepreneur, but the latest thing he was doing was in fintech. I didn't know how to make it go. So I said about so-and-so, and I gave his background. And then I said about this company, and I let that flow and explain like just what this company is doing. I didn't feel great about it, but I got, you know, 6 podcasts for him in 24 hours because that opening line was all that was necessary.
Awesome, dude. Awesome. Really good perspective. How do people connect with you?
So my company is called Outlier Audio. So it's outlieraudio.com. My Instagram is just my name, Spencer Carpenter. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Those are my 3 preferred. I'm not on Facebook as much. I'm not on Twitter. So yeah, those are the 3 ways. And you can email me, Spencer@outlieraudio.com.
Right on, buddy. Well, we're going to link to all of that, man. This has been great, dude. Like when I met you at that lunch, you know, like I was just like, really, you haven't talked about, like, you got to talk about it. And I had really high expectations and you totally over delivered, man. I want you to know that I'm actually getting a speaking opportunity in front of my community of marketers, of CMO marketers at Peak Community. They looked at my invite and were like, our community needs to know about this. Can you make a presentation about what you learned from this call to like help people get on more podcasts, right? So you've already super over delivered, right? Like this, like overall co-creation virtuous cycle is already paying off from what we've done, man. So
Love it.
From the moment that you reached out to me and said you like my energy and you're not a guy that normally talks about people's energies to right now, dude, you've added a ton of value to my life. And thank you for being on the show, man.
Thanks for having me.